Hey cycling friends, James with Team Finish Strong. I'm here in Rome today, very historic city, very cultured city, and it has a very storied past with reference to Christianity. And I wanted to talk today on some topics related to Jerusalem and its ties with Rome. I just happened to walk by the Arch of Titus, and it has some unique ties to Christian history. You see, this arch is a monument celebrating the victory of Titus Vespasian over Jerusalem. And if you look at the inside of the arch, you'll see images of what they did. They destroyed the temple, and they carried off all of its valuable contents, including a golden menorah that's pictured on the inside of the arch. Still standing today, 2,000 years later. Fascinating. Well, the reason why this particular arch is so significant in Christian history is because it is direct evidence of the prophecies that Jesus proclaimed in Mark chapter 13 and also in Matthew regarding the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. You see, this temple is a commemoration of that great victory for the Romans, but also that great defeat for the Jews who were in revolt. And Jesus proclaimed that the temple would be destroyed and that its destruction would be so complete that no stone would be left upon another. And as history records, the temple, which was elaborately ornamented with gold throughout, that when the city burned, the gold melted down into the cracks and crevices of the temple stones. And the Romans, in their earnest to reclaim all of that gold, they would turn the stones over to get the gold extracted from the rubble. And thus the reason why there was no stone left unturned. And well, regarding that, it reminds me that Jesus' words are true. That what he said is not only true from the sense of God's truth, but it's historically accurate, and we can rely on it.
Her name is Nike. She was a pagan goddess.
Well, it's the end of the day, and we had a long day of touring. But I wanted to take a few minutes to share with you a little bit about what I was talking about earlier down at the Arch of Titus. Now, God's truths or spiritual truths are ones that can't be proven necessarily, but they are true nonetheless. And then there are those historical truths, like the evidence that I was telling you about on the Arch of Titus, evidencing the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, Jesus was speaking about the destruction of the temple before he was crucified. And that speaks to a deeper spiritual truth, and that is about the judgment of God. You see, when Jesus was being condemned, Pilate asked everyone in the crowd who he should release. Now, it was the custom of the governor on the festival to release one prisoner based on what the crowd picked, and they had to choose between either Barabbas or Jesus, and they chose Barabbas. And when Pilate asked them what was to become of Jesus, they said they wanted him crucified. And even though he had done nothing wrong, and Pilate had said that he was innocent of this man's blood, the crowd had insisted that it was their responsibility, that his blood would be on them and their children. And you know, God's justice is perfect and his timing is perfect. And I don't think it's any coincidence that 40 years later, in 70 AD, Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans, completely wiped out, absolute devastation. No one was left alive in the city. And I believe that this was God's fulfillment of that judgment. I say that to say this, and that is that God's justice comes, folks, for all of his people, whether it be for his precious son or for those he loves. And we should rest in that assurance that God's divine protection and his divine justice are always perfect. He tempers justice with mercy for the guilty, but he doesn't leave those who are guilty unpunished. You see, we either have to accept the judgment of God on his son Jesus as atonement for our punishment, as atonement for our crimes, or we have to take it upon ourselves. And in Jesus' day, the Jews faced that punishment alone in their own merits. We don't have to face that kind of judgment, friends. You see, we can ask Jesus to be our atoning sacrifice, our sacrificial lamb. And when God sits on his judgment seat in court for our case, he will proclaim us innocent in his eyes. That the debt is paid in full. And that should encourage us, friends. God's judgment and his wrath is a very fearful thing. We see an example of that in the destruction of Jerusalem. And it should cause us to run to his mercy, friends. Will you run to his mercy today? Well, we have had some beautiful weather here in Rome last couple of days. We're going to be heading back to familiar places very soon. But until I see you again, friends, take care. God bless. And as always, finish strong.